We are Rogue Media Sports.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It is the Doomsday podcast, live from Frito Nation Productions, and Ed Werder standing by from Colorado as we speak. He's there to Labor Day, and then we get him back among us. And Ed, lots to get to in this edition. We're getting close to real games. I am so excited, and I'm excited. I know this will be cryptic, but there is so much huge news in mostly Mosley LLC / Doomsday land. There is a lot happening, Ed, and I think the things we're about to be rolling out over the next week or so is going to be exciting for our audience, and I just wanted you to know that something's coming, and I know you'll be excited about that, Ed.
Is this a we thing, as you just suggested there, or is it really a mostly thing?
No, it's a we, man. We're all in the same boat. We all grow together. When we lose, we all lose together. But I don't even think we've had a loss yet. I mean, this is.
I was going to say, is that what's going to happen? Is that what you're predicting? I mean, it is Doomsday.
That's right.
All.
You've been very cynical. It's really weird. I'm at times have been more cynical than you in life, and lately, I don't know. I've just sensed this tone with all your text messages. I am so excited, and I know you are too. And
you know why I think I'm generally more cynical than you? Because I'm generally more aware of things around me than you are, and so I see a lot more reality than probably you're aware of.
You know what? I think not dealing with reality has actually helped me in my career. So I'm going to continue down this path. It is the Doomsday podcast, and today we will be reacting to a very, very important and tough setback for the Cowboys' defense, the continued rise of a backup quarterback, and the return, of course, of Zeke Elliott, and then his upcoming hearing. It is about to happen in New York. In fact, he's on a flight today and was on a flight and is in New York preparing to meet with the NFL on an appeals hearing. And so a lot to cover. Frito, if you would do me the pleasure of playing my friend and yours, Ronnie Foss. Play the music, please. And yes, it is the Doomsday podcast, and we are getting closer and closer to the game, to the regular season, that is. And Ed, I know out there in Colorado, it's gorgeous. You're out there kind of, close to, I would say, the Fort Collins area. We won't be too specific. Folks might be showing up. We might have some Doomsday fans coming by to say hi to you. But the dress rehearsal game, the much-talked-about game where you actually see the starters go for a pretty good while. You had Dak Prescott going for a full first half. But, Ed, I'll get right to it. Anthony Hitchens, Cowboys starting middle linebacker, late in the first half, comes down with an apparent knee injury. And as we tape this on Sunday afternoon, live from Frito Nation Productions, latest news coming from our buddy Todd Archer of ESPN, that it is, Ed, a broken tibia. And now on the surface, that sounds awful and sounds like, hey, the man's broken his leg. When are we ever going to see him again? But the truth of the matter is, compared to some of the other possible outcomes, which when you see a guy not be able to put really any weight on his leg as he was being helped off the field. You think of a possible ACL, and Ed, I'll let you explain sort of the ramifications for this, but of all the things that could have happened, this is not as good an outcome as what happened with Tyrone Crawford, obviously, but not the worst possible outcome to Anthony Hitchens.
Right. I think the fear was among virtually everybody in the organization that this was going to be a season-ending ACL injury. So you're right, even though it's a fracture, and that's obviously very significant, my understanding is that this would not require surgery under normal circumstances, and the recovery period would be about 8 weeks. So I think they would be looking at he and Ezekiel Elliott coming back at approximately the same time, assuming Ezekiel Elliott does have to serve a 6-game suspension. But we all know that the defense is the liability on this football team, and Anthony Hitchens doesn't get a lot of recognition, but he is a very valuable linebacker, especially considering he's their third leading tackler last season. He's versatile enough to have played all three positions at the linebacker level, and they're going over all the various permutations and options that are available to them right now, from what I understand in their personnel meetings at the Star. Obviously, the one thing they could do is they could, if they feel Jaylon Smith is far enough along in his recovery, make him the starting middle linebacker. And I could certainly see them doing that in early down situations where the possibility of a run is more likely than that of a pass. I think they think he's ready to play and be prominent against the run. And then I think the other thing that they could do is put Justin Durant in there in a sort of timeshare position with Jaylon Smith. They signed him before camp. He's really been working himself into shape, veteran player. He's not the athlete and certainly doesn't have the size that a guy like Jaylon Smith has, but he's a veteran player. He knows what he's doing. He started a lot of games. He knows their system. So to me, that seems like the most logical move for the Cowboys to make through the early part of the season. Stephen Jones was asked about Jaylon Smith after the game, and he basically said they don't want to force him into a position where they're jeopardizing his recovery and forcing him to play too much early as he, just begins to adapt to playing in the NFL. And still probably has some things he's trying to overcome mentally with that knee injury and the nerve damage. And, he's been a little bit vulnerable, I think, when he tries to move laterally. He's been okay when he runs forward. And so that's why I think they'd probably tend to use him more in rundown situations, at least in the early part of the season.
Now, last night, some good moments, some tough moments for Jaylon Smith. And I thought one of the better moments was a little screen pass that the Raiders tried to throw out there, and he snuffed it out and made just a great hit. He's going to have some moments where he's really quick to the football, and he missed a tackle last night when he showed up. But I mean, his awareness and his ability to diagnose plays seems to be there on that particular play that I'm talking about. Put a loss on the Raiders. I believe that was the young man from Texas Tech, the running back for the Raiders, their backup tailback to Marshawn Lynch, who Jaylon Smith made the play on. Now, Ed, you'll be happy to know, because Jaylon Smith is a big supporter and a friend of the Doomsday podcast, did reach out to him. And I think because of the things you just talked about, with not knowing exactly what they're going to do right now, Jaylon declined my offer to pop on with us. And I think Jaylon will be back on with us soon, but I totally understand that. And Ed, I'm someone who just really doesn't, unless you work for Cumulus, I don't hold grudges. I think you have been somebody that can hold a grudge. And so I just wanted to tell you that Jaylon is not he hasn't gotten too big time for us, but I think he just decided that today it was maybe better to just kind of hold off a little bit.
I think I kind of consider you the boss of our little production here.
It's news to me.
But if I might suggest going forward that we only share with our audience, vast as it may be, our successes in trying to get people and not people who decline to speak to us. I think that would be to our benefit.
Okay. All right. No, I want this to stay in. Frito, do not cut that. We were turned down by Jaylon Smith, and I'm gonna go ahead and just admit that. Now, Ed, this is some more Well, this is very exciting news. There's been a lot of interest in Doomsday from our fans, of course, and our listeners. Everybody's subscribing there on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, all the various ways you can get to us. But we do have our friends and our new sponsors at FanDuel. I mean, here we go. We have sponsorship. That, to me, that means something is working. Folks are excited, and I'm excited about FanDuel for a lot of reasons. Fantasy football fans, the wait is nearly over. Football's back, which means FanDuel is back. Over 2.5 million players have won a cash prize playing fantasy sports on FanDuel. Sign up today. Go to FanDuel.com, click the Join Now button. I mean, Ed, I think you could figure this out. And use our code Doomsday, DOOMSDAY. New users get free entry into the NFL Sunday Million with over $1 million in cash prizes when you make your first deposit on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com and sign up with the promo code Doomsday. That's FanDuel.com, the promo code Doomsday. Void where prohibited. Ed, does that get you excited? I mean, the fact that
what got me excited
we
is
have sponsors.
2.5 million people have won playing fantasy football with FanDuel. And, given that I'm now, not working at ESPN, I'm still getting paid. It seems like a good way for me to maybe supplement my income and take advantage of my vast, great experience as Field Yates' partner at ESPN, where last year we did make the playoffs. I'm going to miss, my interactions every Sunday from the stadium where I'm covering a game with Sarah Walsh, who unfortunately was also laid off. But this seems like a good opportunity for me to supplement my income and maybe help, pay for this house I have in Colorado.
That's right. Well, Ed, I have signed up. It's extremely easy. And then we're going to figure out some ways where our listeners can get involved with us on FanDuel. And the great thing about FanDuel is you're not, once your year-long fantasy team, sometimes they kind of blow up on you. Man, you can just start anew all the time. Thank you. And remember to go there and sign up. Use that promo code Doomsday. Ed, back to it. I want to, as we sort of move forward with this defensive situation, some good moments last night, some negative moments. I thought David Carr was, for whatever reason, a little off in this game early.
Derek Carr.
Yeah, that's certainly David is his older brother, former first-round pick of the Texans. Thank you for catching that. But young Derek Carr, who had a great season for the Raiders last year and really has been a big part of that franchise turning around here recently, made the playoffs last season. Thought he was off, and then he found it. And, Ed, there were two particular plays, both enormous plays. You know what I'm talking about with they've got Cordero Patterson now, who used to be with the Vikings. One play up the seam there. Ed, you can talk about that a little bit. It just looked like, he was just, if there's a big old how tall is Cordero Patterson? He's a lanky man. He looks
he's probably like 6'4".
You think he's about 6'4"? This is a big target.
First-round draft pick of the Vikings. Norv Turner was never really able to make much of a player out of him as a receiver. He's a great return guy.
Yeah.
But kind of limited in the number of routes he could run. He's basically a guy who runs up the seam or down the boundary and, creates a lot of big plays, and that's what he did in the situation you're talking about against the Cowboys. And I think, the Cowboys have got to be getting concerned about, if we talked about the Hitchens injury, so now he's out for – 8 weeks, so he's going to miss, 6 games or so. Then you've got these suspensions that guys like David Irving and Demontre Moore have to serve early in the year. You've got, 2 of your first 3 draft picks are young players in the secondary that you were counting on playing a lot of snaps who have just not been healthy enough to be a part of it in the preseason since very early on. Cheeto Uzie, the second-round pick, and Jordan Lewis And it sounds like Lewis might not even play at all in the preseason going forward.
I don't think there's any way he's going to play. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, so I just think you're looking, at a lot of questions on the defensive side of the football. Especially when you open the season against a team like the Giants, who you might be able to take advantage of their pass protection, should be able to, even with the personnel that the Cowboys are going to be limited to early in the year. But you're looking at trying to cover three pretty good wide receivers, assuming Odell Beckham Jr. recovers from that ankle sprain and Brandon Marshall from the shoulder injury, and they're able to play against the Cowboys. That's gonna be a difficult challenge for them early in the season on the defensive side of the football.
No, I think you're right. And the second one I was talking about was that touchdown pass that Derek Carr threw, where Ed. And this is there's this thought that the Byron Jones, former first-round pick for the Cowboys, was going to really become a leader back there, and he obviously has incredible athleticism. On that particular play, Carr goes with the pretty aggressive pump fake over on kind of like what looked to be a quick hitter or a seam route, and as they said on the broadcast last night, there's no reason in the world for a safety on the other side of the field to be biting on that, because he has nothing to do with where he was, where that fake was, and then Carr loads up. And I'm telling you, Ed, that was not. I guess it technically is a deep ball, but it's not like he put it wasn't your typical deep ball. He threw it on a frozen rope, and Byron Jones just took a horrible angle. So that was ugly, and then Anthony Brown, I think, was the corner over there. But I think most people felt like that was more of a safety issue than with the cornerback. But those kind of
and you got to remember, in his defense, and I don't know exactly what happened. Byron Jones, you're right, he's taking more of a leadership role, and there's a lot more responsibility on him because of the youth in the secondary, given the decision that the Cowboys made in the offseason, not to bring back Barry Church. Not to re-sign Mo Claiborne and Brandon Carr. And so the potential for that kind of miscommunication is a lot higher, given that he hasn't spent as much time on the field with these other players. And now he's more responsible than ever for relaying assignments and making sure everybody knows what coverage they're playing. And quite honestly, I think, we've heard from, guys like Darren Woodson who say, hey, Mike Heath, he's just not, or Jeff Heath is just not as good as Barry Church. So he's another liability back there. They think he's had a great camp. He's been a guy who's been very slow to develop, but we'll see what they're able to do. I think the general thought around the league is that Rod Marinelli's defense is going to be forced to play a lot more zone than they're used to early in the season, because of all of the changes that have been made and because of all of the young players who are going to be involved in roles that they're unfamiliar with.
Yeah, and to your point, with it being suspensions or injuries, whatever, keeping some of these players out, we've already covered a little bit of the Anthony Hitchens injury, and the name might not be a household name across the league, but he's a respected guy on the team. Boy, you heard some of Sean Lee's comments after the game. With him being out for at least what looks like 2 months with that fractured tibia, that is a major setback. And the other problem is, Ed, Sean Lee's a great player, and Durant could step in at middle linebacker, and I think it was good that they brought him back. But the other the strong side linebacker, Damian Wilson, who's had an excellent camp and I think continues to make some nice plays, is subject to suspension. We spent so much time talking about Zeke Elliott and his suspension. Ed, do you have any sense of when we will hear about that particular suspension, if that is going to happen? Because his case, that was the kind of road rage or parking lot rage, we might call it. We're still kind of waiting on that to proceed, but the league has shown they don't really have to wait for anything the authorities do before making a decision. We don't know if Damian Wilson is going to be ready to go at the start of the season. And
he's played an awful lot of snaps at a variety of positions. And like you said, he's had a great camp, and they depend a lot on him. He's another guy, who can create a lot of tackles for loss and create pressure as a blitzer. And I just think that, knowing the league's concern about players and weapons as it pertains to the personal conduct policy, it's hard for me to imagine that if Damian Wilson did what he's been accused of doing, or if he even pulled a weapon in a situation like this in public, I have to think there's going to be some significant disciplinary action taken by Roger Goodell and the league office as it pertains to that. Now, do they do it, before the start of the season? That would be my expectation. And like we said, the Cowboys could start the season with 6 players that they would be depending on playing against the Giants and their subsequent opponents early in the year, who could all begin the season under suspension and not be available to this football team.
Yeah, it is something that the Cowboys are dealing with on almost an annual basis, and yet this year seems especially tough with all these things hitting. Now, speaking of Roger Goodell in his office, Ed, Zeke Elliott has made his way to New York, and he will miss Monday and Tuesday out in Frisco. Tuesday will be the day of the hearing. The arbitrator, Harold Henderson, longtime NFL executive, and has been the arbitrator in several of these in the past. In fact, he was the one that heard Greg Hardy's appeal. And so this will happen on Tuesday. Now, Ed, walk us through. You're someone that's been known to put on a coat and tie and go to New York and stand outside some of these places. Now, how long do you think this hearing will take? And then after it's done, what do we think is the timetable? Because obviously they'll either say, okay, we're going to stick with the suspension, we'll take a few games off. That's another thing. Or if after that's determined, then Zeke Elliott may do something Tom Brady did and try to seek help in federal court. Walk us through a little bit of the timetable, knowing that we're getting a lot closer to that opening game on September 11th versus the Giants.
Well, I think there's a recognition by the league office, by Roger Goodell, by Harold Henderson, that they need to make an expedited decision after hearing this appeal, which will probably take up most of the day on Tuesday. We know Elliott is going to participate, or at least be present himself, which not all players choose to do. Whether he shows some contrition or makes some admissions that would cause Harold Henderson to suggest that there should be some leniency that he's so far not been allowed under the 6-game suspension that Roger Goodell has implemented, I that's unlikely. From everything I've heard, Matt, the league office, looking at this investigation, reviewing it carefully before administering, punishment on Zeke Elliott, they feel they've got a very compelling case with really strong evidence. And I was specifically told early on that this is not going to be automatically reduced. Anybody who thinks that is flat out wrong. This is going to require Zeke Elliott providing the league some compelling new evidence that was not a part of the previous consideration. I know, Cowboy fans are hopeful because Harold Henderson, like you said, reduced significantly the Greg Hardy punishment from 10 games to 4. But the reality is, I think it was easy to make a case then that he was significantly over-punished. I don't know that you can make that same case here because Goodell has implemented a personal conduct policy that mandates a 6-game suspension or gives that as a baseline. And so it's going to be hard to argue that that's excessive when that is what is suggested by the definition of the rule for an incident of domestic violence, as Zeke Elliott has been accused of. What he and the Cowboys do if Henderson upholds the punishment as is remains to be seen. Like you said, they could go to court like Tom Brady did. And he didn't have the same support of the Patriots that Elliott might with the Cowboys. It's interesting that Jerry Jones still has said very little specifically as it pertains to what they'll do to try to get Zeke Elliott on the football field early this season. if the appeal does not go in his favor this week.
Ed, I felt really good about you, as I do often. But when Jerry made the statement last night to reporters following that preseason game, you weren't at that party. Now he's talking about his Hall of Fame party, and he said you were not in that room if you weren't a good friend of mine. And of course, you and the fair Jillian were right in there in the middle of that thing, and so that made me feel good.
Are you using that to contradict Jerry?
That's right. That's a good point. I think Jerry went a little too far there.
That's proof that Jerry was rather indiscriminate when he invited different people.
I tell you what, I was that just to me firmed things up for you and Jerry. Whatever issues y'all have had, and the time he shouted expletives at you.
It was interesting that Jerry Jones, when he finally does comment, the thing he does talk most about is the regard he has for Harold Henderson.
Yes.
I think they were on the competition committee for 15 years together. He talked about him as a lawyer, a guy who's earned his place in the league, all this great respect that
former
Jerry
police officer. Yeah.
Right, which is kind of the opposite approach to what Jerry did before the ruling was made by Goodell, when he basically said there's no reason that he should be punished for domestic violence. This isn't even a he said, she said. So he basically challenged the commissioner before he even made his ruling, basically saying you can't possibly be realistically thinking about taking the game away from my player based on the evidence that you have, because I've seen it all, and it doesn't merit a suspension. Now he's taking, it seems like, the opposite approach, in which he's trying to show, great respect for the office and the person involved in making ultimately this appeal decision on Zeke Elliott.
Did you and Harold say hello to each other at this party, and do you even know what Harold Henderson looks like?
I do know what Harold Henderson looks like. I did not see him at the party.
Okay.
My attention was really fixated on Justin Timberlake.
That Jill's was for sure.
Oh, Jill's.
I don't. No, that was. Man, we never did talk enough about that performance. But I will say this: while we're still on running back, now here is my thought. What will happen? I think. I do think it'll get reduced, and it sounds like you're leaning toward thinking that it won't. I think it might even get reduced to 4 games. I think that's what's going to happen.
I just think at some point, I think the league has looked so bad on so many of these domestic violence rulings and the suspensions that they've imposed, and there's been so much variation in the punishment that at some point the league has to say, hey, we got it right. This is what our bylaws now say.
Yeah.
He violated this. This is now the new baseline. We're starting with Zeke Elliott. It's 6 games. Anybody else who does similar going forward is going to get at least 6 games as well.
But I
think they've got to create some continuity on the punishment.
And that's probably true. If you go by history, that seems to be what happens with this Harold Henderson. Now, whatever happens, whether it's 4 games, 5 games, 6 games, then they have to make a decision. Will part of the decision, and I think this might be the case, the Cowboys could do like the Patriots and go, okay, yeah, fight this thing, let's put it in federal court, and you get the whole season. Now, they don't know that for sure, but it certainly worked out that way with Tom Brady. Because that's something they could look at that's happened pretty recently. The flip side of that is, get it over with now. We feel great about Dak, and I have to say, from watching the game last night, Alfred Morris has lost some weight. Like, he was a sledgehammer back. That great season he had as a rookie for the Redskins, he would run over you. To me, he looks so much better and just niftier or more nimble than McFadden. I mean, I do think that you have to kind of think about that in the equation. We have Alfred Morris, and I think he's the starting back if Zeke's out. And I wonder if that makes them go, okay, because we have Alfred and because we have McFadden and then even the young Smith, Rod Smith hanging around, why we feel like we can survive this and go ahead and take the games now. If
Zeke Elliott truly believes he has been wronged in all of this and that he is completely innocent of these allegations, then I think he owes it to himself, regardless of football, to challenge the decision, because this taints him as a person. This makes him, we saw in Peter King's Monday Morning Quarterback article a few weeks ago that one of the things Jason Garrett's tried to use to motivate Zeke to behave himself in a more professional manner off the field and not put himself in jeopardy in situations like this and others has been to say, hey, you know what? There are a lot of sponsors who are willing to spend money on Cowboys superstars, and right now they're choosing to spend it on the quarterback rather than on you, the running back, even though you might be the bigger star on this football team. So I think for a lot of reasons, if Zeke, and he's one of the few people who truly knows if these allegations are correct or they're not, if he really feels he's been wronged, and we don't know because he hasn't reacted publicly, then he owes it to himself to try to create a just verdict, right? And so does Jerry Jones. If they truly believe that this is unfair and that these accusations are flat out wrong, as Jerry said earlier, then don't they owe it to him and to themselves to challenge this to the highest possible court?
Unless Jerry has decided maybe that he was too strident in his defense and backs off at some point. And, I mean, he certainly has remained quiet on all fronts, and I don't know where he and Roger Goodell are. I will say this. I think the Cowboys, this is a little different than the Patriots. The sense I'm getting from the Cowboys, and maybe this is just Jerry's a little bit better at forgiving or moving on than Robert Kraft, but the thought is from the Cowboys organization, from the people I've talked to, that they don't sense, how I kept bringing that up, and Peter King had some very interesting comments on it. What would this do to the long-term relationship of Roger Goodell and Jerry Jones? There's a belief in the Cowboys organization that Jerry and Roger will sort of move on from this fairly quickly. And so I'm wondering if Jerry backs off a little bit. It'll be fascinating to see how this plays out. Now, a couple other things we need.
Well, I think part of how that relationship evolves going forward will be determined by ultimately what the punishment is, and not only what the punishment is, if there is any, but also how does it wind up affecting the Cowboys season. If it's a full 6-game suspension and the Cowboys go 0-6, I'm not so sure that Jerry's going to be all that forgiving of Roger Goodell.
I'll just say this one thing I disagree with you on, and
that's fine. You're allowed to be wrong.
Maybe is a I know, and I'm happy to be wrong if anybody thinks that out there. But I believe that. Now, maybe you're right in terms of from commercials or endorsements and that kind of thing, but in some sort of sense, this year-long investigation and the result of this, I sense that this is almost in some sort of twisted way endeared Zeke more to the fans than ever. All this free Zeke. Now, I do see sort of the...
Well, that's disturbing.
Well...
That's a sad commentary on society. If somebody is accused of and punished for committing an act of domestic violence now becomes some kind of martyr.
Well, he didn't. He was punished by something that did not, that's not a court of law. It was outside of the criminal justice system by who he was punished by. And
right, but that doesn't mean that the outcome was incorrect. It doesn't mean he wasn't deserving of the punishment just because there's a lower legal standard or no legal standard at all in the NFL. It's really based on their interpretation of the evidence, right? I mean, they don't have to meet any legal standard. But I think it's a sad commentary that that a player gets suspended for something like this, and the immediate reaction of the public, especially of that team's specific fan base, and we saw it with Tom Brady too, is to start, crying about how unjust the whole thing has been to the player. And I understand that the person, the alleged victim in this case, is somebody who harmed their own credibility by admittedly lying and trying to convince others to lie as well. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen.
No,
right?
I agree. Basically, and
like,
maybe, but let me finish real quick. I agree with that, and I meant to preface it with it. I think it is a sad commentary, but I think it's a true commentary in my mind that I don't think he's tainted by this. I think if anything, no, I mean, you go all the way back to Kobe Bryant and what happened with the Lakers. If you don't think, I mean, you can't even bring that up anymore in Los Angeles. If him flying back there and being accused of a rape allegation, which obviously the charges were eventually dropped. I mean, that in some crazy way made him. That endeared him to that fan base even more than he was already. Now, a huge part of it was he was just an incredible player, but he was seen as that was like we do this in sports. It's like, oh my gosh, he overcame this adversity. You know how this happens. Like, this will quickly get spun into, man, he had to endure this adversity. We forget sometimes, well, it was of their own making. They're the ones who put themselves in this situation.
Jason Witten has really gone about it the wrong way, then, hasn't he?
What's that?
Well, Jason Witten becoming a star and a valued member of society. He should have done it the way Kobe Bryant did it, and the way Zeke Elliott might have done it. He might have been more popular. He might have been a first ballot Hall of Famer, the first in his position.
I hear you.
I'm being sarcastic.
No. I know exactly what you're doing. I am able to recognize sarcasm, but
I was pointing it out to our.
Good. No, I think they get you, Ed. I mean, I think people are starting to figure you out after all these years. But it is that. No, it's kind of sad to look at it that way. Now, back to the field a little bit. I thought Zeke looked fine. He had 6 carries, 18 yards, had a one-handed catch, had 2 catches for 10 yards, missed an assignment. Can't be doing that. You cannot be he at some point turned around on pass protection and said, hey, throw it to me. And fortunately, Dak is nimble enough to sidestep a rusher, or he could have been had his head knocked off back there. So bad move there by Zeke. But I thought Zeke looked fine, and that's probably plenty of action to get him ready. I would say at this point, if I had to put a number on it, it is 50-50. It is 50-50 in my mind that whether or not he will play in that first game against the Giants.
I think you have to credit Will McClay and the scouting staff for they recognized that this was a possibility and they took it seriously. They've created maximum options at the position, in collecting veteran running backs like Darren McFadden, Alfred Morris. You mentioned Ronnie Hillman, who had a touchdown catch last night. He's a guy who's proven he can play in the league and can maybe do something different than the other 2 guys we mentioned. But I just don't think you can overemphasize the importance of Ezekiel Elliott to this football team, and not just on offense, but just on offense. They averaged 3.8 yards per rush with Elliott off the field last year and 5.1 yards per rush with him on the field last year. And, he's kind of the guy who not only sets the tone for the offensive line and for the style of football that the Cowboys want to play and need to play to be successful. It's part of their formula. And part of that applies to the defense, which we've talked about, being the weak link on this team. And they've got to prevent that side of the ball from being overexposed. And the way they do that is they dominate time of possession because they feature Ezekiel Elliott in the run game. Last year, only the Philadelphia Eagles had better time of possession than the Cowboys. So only the Eagles defense was on the field more than the Cowboys defense last year. So that's an important part of the equation to me. And he is unique in his ability. Like, that's why they took him. People say, oh, well, Darren McFadden, he's great. He had a 1,000-yard rusher too, But Darren McFadden had like 500 fewer yards and 12 fewer touchdowns than Zeke Elliott the year before. And I know the quarterback situation was different then. Romo was hurt. It was a bad situation for them. But still, Zeke Elliott is the guy who makes this whole thing work for the Cowboys.
No, I agree with that. Now, I will say for a 6-game period or however long it turns out to be, if he is out, the guy you saw last night, and I think we've seen enough of him for the preseason, and there was a lot of talk. That was the thing we talked to Dak Prescott about. Well, people are going to wonder about the sophomore slump. I was struck by something. A thought filled my head last night. And, of course, Ed, I don't know how you kind of consumed all this. I watched the first half then watched the fight, and then went back and watched the second half. So I kind of, that's how I consumed everything. And the fight actually exceeded my expectations last night. Of course, I'm talking about McGregor-Mayweather. But back to Dak. I believe now, and I have so much respect for Eli Manning. It's a player I've gotten to cover a lot over the years. I've spent some time one-on-one with him. I know you have too, and you have immense respect for him. But at this point in their careers, I got the sense watching Dak last night and then watching him take a couple of shots downfield. He was a little long on one where it looked like Dez was open, but he also, had a couple more that I thought were just beautifully thrown balls. Some of it was called back. One was to Terrence Williams, and that was unfortunately brought back because of the Lyle Collins cannot stop hitting players in their head or in their face mask and all this. But all this to say, I believe Dak Prescott is the best quarterback in the NFC East, and I have to say right now, other than Aaron Rodgers, I have a really, really hard time seeing any quarterback in the NFC. I would even right now, if you said, okay, you can have the man from Highland Park, the man from Detroit,
Matt Stafford.
You can have Stafford. You can have anybody you want outside of
Russell Wilson.
Outside of Aaron Rodgers, I take Dak Prescott and I would put him above Russell Wilson at this point.
No, that's high praise. And
I would take him.
I certainly would say that I have few, if any, concerns that this season's not going to be better than his rookie year. I think he's going to throw more interceptions, but I think he'll take care of the football better than most quarterbacks. I just think when you look at him, he could not possibly appear more ready for the start of the season and the start of his second year in the NFL based on what we've seen to this point. He's going to be a better quarterback. Few guys prepare like he does. We've seen that nothing affects his composure. We've seen him go toe to Ben Roethlisberger in Pittsburgh and prevail, and with Aaron Rodgers in Lambeau Field and prevail. So I have no questions about his ability to be one of the top quarterbacks in all of football. But I also recognize that Zeke Elliott's a huge part of that. And as it pertains to a comparison between he and Eli Manning, Manning's obviously won 2 Super Bowl rings, and he played well in both of those games, made the big play both times, but he just doesn't have the offensive line that Dak Prescott has. And so Prescott's going to be pretty well protected, although I just don't think you can overlook the importance that Zeke Elliott brings to the running back position as a blitz pickup guy either, even though he missed an assignment last night in the game. Look what happened when Alfred Morris was supposed to be doing that, and it's something he hasn't done or didn't do in his career with the Redskins very often, and even though he's a veteran player, he doesn't always do it well, and that led to Cooper Rush being hit from the backside and giving up the football, led to a defensive touchdown. So I think Zeke Elliott is going to be missed in a lot of different facets.
I agree with that. I do have to say one more thing on Dak Prescott that was kind of funny to me was to see, these guys that are like basically coming in the same point of the game, Cooper Rush, and we'll talk about Cooper Rush in a minute, but there all of a sudden I see Cook on the back of a jersey, and I'm like, Cook, and then I'm like, oh, Connor Cook, who the Cowboys wanted, and Paxton Lynch, who recently was not able to win the starting job against Trevor Siemian, and let's not act like Siemian is he's done a nice job, but this guy doesn't have like one of the greatest pedigrees or anything out there, and both those quarterbacks were the Cowboys were after, and Dak Prescott has become, well, he'll have his own story, I believe, someday in terms of Tom Brady is the greatest 6th-round pick ever, and I think Dak Prescott will go down someday is one of the greatest 4th-round picks ever, is the way I think this will play out. Now, Ed, I do want, and we'll get into Cooper Rush, but I want to bring up our partners, our friends, our sponsors at FanDuel. And, FanDuel is something that is a lot of fun, and it's back. Football is back. All this is happening. and over 2.5 million players have won a cash prize playing fantasy sports on FanDuel. Fantasy football for everyday fans. New contests starting every week. No busted seasons. New users, by the way, Ed, get free entry into the NFL Sunday Million with over $1 million in cash prizes when you make your first deposit on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com and sign up with the promo code Doomsday. That's DOOMSDAY. That's FanDuel.com, promo code Doomsday, void where prohibited. Sign up today and go to FanDuel.com and just click where it says Join Now, and then use that code Doomsday. And isn't that exciting? I mean, we've had a lot of folks interested in us, but I think it's very appropriate for what we do and your illustrious past in fantasy football that the number one name in daily fantasy, FanDuel, becomes one of the first big-time sponsors for the Doomsday podcast.
Well, I was just impressed with the way you read that. We finally found something that you do well.
Oh, my gosh, Ed.
I don't know how many episodes we're into this Doomsday podcast thing, but it seems like you finally found an area where you can make a significant contribution. That's reading those testimonials.
You're so biting in and I don't know what you're talking about reading. I have nothing in front of me. Yes, no, your compliments are other people's criticism, and it's very hurtful to me, Ed. Ed, now I think it's very important that we do discuss the Cowboys. Let's go ahead and call it. I think last night, other than just maybe Scott Linehan's love for Kellen Moore, it appears that Cooper Rush, a rookie quarterback, has walked into this camp. I mean, not even Tony Romo did this. I was there when Romo showed up from Eastern Illinois. And I loved what Tony was doing. But Tony didn't break into – I mean, if it weren't for – Quincy Carter getting dragged out of his hotel room back in 2004 at training camp, we don't know if we'd ever had the story of Tony Romo. And now it looks like Cooper Rush has played himself into the backup quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. Ed, it is remarkable. And I'll say this, to continue down this path of Tony, I was there, and I know you were there too. I watched Tony from the start. Now, you knew he had something. But Cooper Rush is so far advanced at this stage to where Tony was. I'm not saying he's going to have Tony's career. I'm not saying that. Don't get on to me, people. I'm just saying that when he was a rookie compared to where Tony is a rookie, he has way more poise and way more like fundamentals, everything than Tony had at this point. And another big-time outing from Cooper Rush, and he gets it done every time he comes into the game. It seems to lead to a couple of touchdowns. The guy's always about, he was 13 for 14, I believe. And I think I'm going to go ahead and declare this race over. Cooper Rush, your number 2 quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys.
Well, I don't know that that's where the coaches are yet.
It's where I am.
We do know that Jerry Jones said afterward a very significant thing about Cooper Rush, and that is that he's not going to get waived when they make the final cut. So that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be the number 2 quarterback. I believe, based on what I've been told, that there's big support building among the coaching staff for Rush to be the number 2 quarterback ahead of Kellen Moore. And you mentioned Scott Linehan and his relationship with Kellen Moore. He's clearly been his biggest sponsor. That's the reason Kellen Moore's gotten the opportunities that he has in the Cowboys organization. That being said, Scott has said, I can be objective about this. And he needs to be. He needs to do what Matt Eberflus, the linebackers coach, said is going to be required of him. He knows the great story that Jaylon Smith is. But he said, look, you got to evaluate the number. In other words, take the emotion out of it and just base your evaluation on what's best for the team and what this player can contribute. And I think Cooper Rush is probably going to do the unthinkable here and come out of camp on this roster. Now, is it as the number 2? I think support is building for him to achieve exactly that. And unless he fails in this last game or Kellen Moore plays exceptionally well, it does seem like that's the direction it's going to go. But are the Cowboys confident enough in Cooper Rush as the number 2 behind Dak Prescott, who's only played one full season, to go ahead and have only 2 quarterbacks on their roster? I guess they could waive Kellen Moore and put him on the practice squad, which is the opposite of what we all thought would happen a week or two ago. I don't know that Kellen Moore is going to get claimed by anybody based on the way, he played this preseason. But it is a pretty remarkable achievement. I mean, he is a young guy who looks like he's, unaffected by the rush. He's accurate in the pocket. He's quick making decisions. He's accurate with the football. I think the thing that really, Matt, in kind of wrapping this up, the thing that really appealed to the coaches was he was promoted to the, second spot last week, didn't have a great week of practice, and then gets in the game and, loses a fumble for a touchdown. Wasn't really his fault, but it was still affected him potentially. Then he nearly threw a ball that was intercepted. And then he comes back with 2 fourth-quarter touchdown passes to win the game. And ultimately, I think that's how they will judge him. And he probably will win the second job, but I don't think that's happened just yet.
All right, it has been the Doomsday Podcast. One last bit of information, our little conversation, Ed, that I want to have is this mess that is, I think it's funny, we saw another pretty good offensive line with the Oakland Raiders come into town last night, and the Cowboys have, by most people's estimation, the best offensive line in the league. Now, my goodness, they need to figure out Lyle Collins over at right tackle. He's going to have to make some adjustments. Nate seemed to think, Nate Newton, that was something he could make an adjustment on, those hands-to-the-face penalties, but there were way too many penalties. But, Ed, this left guard thing is still not settled. And while we spent a lot of time today talking about the linebacker and the secondary, you don't want any problems with the strength of your football team. And I don't think I'm going too far on a limb to say the offense is by far the strength of this team. Chaz Green down there on the ground hurt. Byron Bell, Jonathan Cooper have kind of battled it out. At this point, Ed, you got to plug somebody in there, but it is interesting that you can have 3 All-Pros, and then basically I think Lyle Collins will be okay out there at right tackle. But this is, and maybe it looks weaker because you're surrounded by so many great players, but this is a potential problem, and things did not get better in the dress rehearsal.
Well, I think Collins is going to be the right tackle, and he did draw 3 penalty flags, and he did wipe out 49 yards with the gains. But he also handled Khalil Mack, one of the best young pass rushers in football, pretty effectively in the series or two that they were up against each other, and that's going to be important, as we talked about. They're going to play the best pass rushers in the league this year because they play teams in the AFC West, and that means you're going up against Khalil Mack of the Raiders and Joey Bosa of the Chargers and Von Miller of the Broncos. And Collins handled Mack pretty well when they went head-to-head. Now, did we see, was it obviously they didn't game plan, and so it'll be a lot more challenging in the regular season for him to do that again. As for Chaz Green, I think they demonstrated they really want him in the lineup at left guard, but he still has to prove that he's dependable. And then at the end of the game, he departed with an injury yet again, which has been the biggest issue with him throughout. But I think he's going to be the left guard, and I think Jonathan Cooper and Joe Looney are going to be the 2 primary backups. All
right, and my last, and Ed, this is what I'm going to call, and I'm going to do this every week, sort of my just enormous statement that I think a lot of people across the country will kind of take this and try to run with it.
Absurd statement of the week. Sign the apocalypse is upon us. What should we call it?
Mosley's monstrous hot take. I don't know, but we'll work on that. But here is the declaration for this week, and I'll just have a quick reaction, and we'll say goodbye to the fine folks out there. Malik Collins, the best defensive lineman on this team, and after Sean Lee, the second best defensive player on the team. His name, Malik Collins, former third-round pick from Nebraska. There it is, Ed.
So your proclamation is basically going to be whatever Zach Martin said the week before?
I don't. Hey, if you were basing things on me listening to Zach Martin quotes, then that's not a fair allegation.
Well, that's what Zach Martin's on the record as saying that Collins is going to be one of the best three technique players in the whole league, and that's essentially what you've just said.
That's great.
That's fine.
That's great. Fine. Zach and I are kindred spirits. Love the young man, and I don't blame him for being downfield. Dak was a little hesitant on that play, and my man got called for an eligible man downfield. I think you saw that, Ed. Ed, are you able to get these games in Colorado?
Absolutely. You can. I watched the whole thing last night after I watched the Broncos and Packers, which was televised here live, and then I recorded and watched frame by frame the Cowboys and the Raiders.
Love a good frame by frame reference from you, Ed. You've done tremendous work. We should do this more often, just the two of us. I mean, we have had probably the biggest name guest of any Cowboys podcast in the land. But, man, it's fun, just the two of us working right through a podcast. And so it's been a good one, Ed, and I want you to say goodbye to all our people. And then next week when we gather around Labor Day, we will be just a week away from the start of the Cowboys 2017 season. Ed, are you ready?
A very complicated task for the Cowboys to put together the roster with all these suspensions pending, these big injuries, and we'll break it all down for you next week.
Cut down day.
I am ready for the challenge.
Cut down day.
And you know what you said about the two of us just talking football?
Yeah.
It occurs to me that if guys like Jaylon Smith keep turning us down, we'll have no choice but to do it that way.
Every week now, I want that to be a new feature. Who turned us down? I want to lead with that. Ed, it's been tremendous. I want to thank Frito Nation Productions. Thank you to our fine sponsor, FanDuel. More on the way, by the way. For whatever reason, folks are lining up wanting to partner with this podcast. Good night, everybody.
See ya.
Well, the Christmas lights are shining, stockings have been hung. You're praying for your daughter, lighting candles for your son. They're living in the city now, you don't see them anymore. This year will not be like the ones before. And the streets are all but empty, the bars have all shut down, and it's hard to find a friend inside this godforsaken town. That emptiness, it feels from your head down to your toes. I'm sorry, baby, that's just the way it goes. Once you were a young girl with lovers by the score, money by the handful, you've never wanted more. But they tend to leave you as time has its way, and they leave behind little mouths to feed and raise. And the days go by so slowly when it used to go so fast. Whiskey does not taste as good when you only pour one glass. There's just no way to know which way the cold wind blows.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.